Yes, actually, our position is moderately nuanced. At least we try to be. It was characteristic of the paper. We think that there are some real issues with China. There are issues that America shares with Europe, particularly on the handling of intellectual property, the way the Chinese government and companies particularly have tried to extort intellectual property from Western companies. The problem is that Mr. Trump has not formed a genuine front with other allies like the Europeans. On the contrary, he's been attacking them. He started, even before this, with the steel and aluminium tariffs against Europe. He's been doing it. These measures are illegal under the WTO, in my view. When the Chinese take the US to the WTO will find against the US ultimately. Europe cares about the WTO, so it's very difficult for the Europeans to support him. And because it's illegal, because it's discriminatory, which is the problem, the Chinese are going to retaliate, and we've got a war. So on balance, we've got, I think, the beginnings of, I mean, we are closer now than in my lifetime to a genuine war.
The Japanese and the Germans both have trade surpluses with the US as well, and yet the Japanese and the Germans are being called to be allies by the likes of Jamie Dimon in his letter with Mr. Trump, what have you. How do you become allies with the people who could be the next target?
Well, one reason might be that they don't want to be the next target. And the other reason is that they do share a concern with China. Namely, they share the concern, because these are countries with very strong intellectual property in manufacturing. They want to protect it. So they do have shared interests. And properly done, Mr. Trump could have put together a coalition. And now he focuses on the trade surpluses. I think that's complete nonsense. Almost all economists would. But the intellectual property issue is a real one. But he can't focus. He can't narrow it down. He has to be at war with everybody.
Since Mr. Trump came in, the markets have been obsessed by him. They've stopped worrying about Janet Yellen and Jay Powell and Mario Draghi so much. Is that right, or have they taken their eye off the board, and actually should we start worrying about ramifications from what Mr. Trump is doing, the good and the bad, for interest rate policy, and that's going to become front and centre again?
Well, interest rate policy is obviously very important, but the truth is that nothing that's happened so far has been surprising. It's all been very, very predictable, because the world economy, if you leave aside Mr. Trump's activities which create all this uncertainty, has actually been moving on a track which has been remarkably stable. So the markets are quite right.
Stable growth of debt, Mark. The stable growth of huge global debts, yeah?
Well, stable growth of the world economy, low interest rates, low inflation, very slow normalization, all looks terribly manageable. So if we took the Trump thing out of the equation, the markets would look at all this and say, looks, there's nothing serious to worry about.
We've been around a while. We remember when the markets were obsessed by countries like Iceland or Cyprus and what have you. The market can worry about anything when it decides to as well. Are all these other issues, like, for instance, Italy, are they going to start coming to the fore?
Well, again, it depends on how monetary policy and interest rates broadly evolve. I think there's a perfectly good reason to argue that we could be in a terrible mess 2 years from now. You can easily imagine it. Inflation rises much faster than we think. Interest rates rise much faster than we think. With the huge fiscal deficits, real interest rise a lot. Then countries start getting into, and borrowers generally, we've got as much debt in the world as we had before the crisis, just differently constituted. So what could happen then is we have a series of debt crises. Of course, that's possible.
Still watching? Perfect. Click here to watch another great video from CNBC International. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.